So this video is going to give you a brief rundown of the current situation in Ukraine, which is here. So if we zoom out a bit, we can see that Ukraine has got the EU to the west and it's got Russia to the east. And on the 21st of November, the Ukrainian President Yanukovych rejected a pro-EU treaty in favour of closer ties with Russia. Protests in Ukraine, which began peacefully in December, escalated in February, with many being killed, and this is where the political drama began. The French, Polish and German foreign ministers soon arrived in Ukraine to attempt to resolve the situation, and eventually a peace treaty was signed by the opposition and President Yanukovych, but soon after, Yanukovych fled the country and arrived in Russia. The exact reasons for his departure haven't been confirmed, but many believe he wanted to avoid the mass murder charge that he was later given. A new government was formed to replace the missing Yanukovych, but Russia says this government is illegal. It was the result of a coup d'etat, which is essentially an illegal overthrowing of the state, and it is hard to see how they're wrong. The West, on the other hand, recognises this government, and this is the root of the problem. Once upon a time, a region to the south of Ukraine, Crimea, belonged to Russia. But in the 1950s, the Russian leader Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine on their 300th anniversary of unification. This means that there are a lot of ethnic Russians living in the area. Once Yanukovych left, armed forces took the region of Crimea. It is unknown whether or not these forces were Russian. Russia claims not, but Russian troops soon arrived with the stated aim of protecting their kin in the area. The West viewed these actions as aggressive and supported Ukraine in its warnings against Russia, but the Russian President Putin claims he is acting on the requests of the legitimate Ukrainian President Yanukovych. Because Crimea is a semi-autonomous region, it was able to hold a vote amongst its people, asking whether or not they wanted to rejoin Russia. This was seen as illegal by Ukraine and the West, but it was held regardless, and 97% of voters chose to join Russia. The EU and US responded with economic sanctions and travel bans on a number of individual members of the Russian government. However, as the Russian Deputy Prime Minister points out, rather mockingly, what about those with no assets abroad? There are a number of obstacles to the West's ideal response to the situation. It is vital to remember that Russia supplies the EU with a vast amount of its oil and has purchased a great deal of US debt. So while they can put economic sanctions on Russia, there's a limit to how far they can go. It's kind of like, how much can you bite the hand that feeds you? It's not only economic considerations that limit the action the West can take. Drawn-out wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have left voters in the US and the UK, two of the most prominent Western nations, war-weary and sceptical of any further military intervention around the world. After the vote, the Crimean government rushed through legislation to formally apply to join Russia, and the Russian government is now in the process of accepting the application. Russia has effectively annexed Crimea, a word which is seldom used in contemporary times, and the situation has sparked talk of a new Cold War between Russia and the West. If you're not sure what the Cold War is, I'll talk about it in another video. A Ukrainian officer has been shot dead, and Ukrainian troops are now being told to withdraw from Crimea, as the political crisis appears to be escalating into a military conflict. Historical ties to the region mean that Russia is unlikely to give up Crimea without good reason. Militarily dwarfed by Russia, the potential response of Ukraine is dependent upon the support of Western powers. The situation in Ukraine is far from resolved.